Well, good evening, ladies, gentlemen, members. Welcome to this evening meeting of the Planning Policy and Local Plan Committee here in the committee room in the Town Hall. We go to agenda item 1, apologies and substitution. Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Chairman. There are no apologies from members of the committee this evening. We've got a full house. But I will offer apologies on behalf of Councillor Maria Fowler, who, as you know, as Chairman of the Planning Committee, along with the portfolio holder responsible for planning, they have a standing right under the Constitution to attend these meetings and to participate in the discussion of items with your invitation. But Councillor Fowler has given her apologies that she can't be here this evening.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Before we go to the rest, I would like to welcome back Councillor Fairley and Councillor Mark Bush, and also welcome to Councillor John White. So nice to see you back on this committee. Agenda item 2 is the minutes of 28th of May 2025. That was a few months back. If you remember, we discussed the issues and option for consultation. Members, are you happy for me to sign the record? Yeah? Councillor, thank you. Agenda item 3 is declaration of interest. Any members have anything to declare? No? Okay, we'll go. Okay, that's noted. Councillor Geeta Sutra has declared that you live in the Blue House, don't you? Thank you. Agenda item 4, question on notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38. Do we have any, Mr. Ford?
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much. Public speaking. I have 2 speakers, but I will invite them to speak after the presentation from Mr. Paul Woods, because that will be more relevant once the presentation is given. Then it'll be more appropriate time for them to say so. Mr. Woods, please present this item. Besides tendering Colchester Border Garden Community, and Hartley Gardens is the largest ever mixed-use development proposal that we as a council have ever had to consider. It can have a meaningful and positive contribution to the higher housing needs that's over this planning period. The preparation of this supplementary planning document marks a really good milestone in progressing a site that's been identified for church uses for a long, long time. The involvement of Homes England and the County Council has ensured that what we have in front of us reflects the best use of the site and local priorities. If it goes through this evening with Cabinet's approval, at the end of the month, a further public consultation will be held in late October and November, which will be before another important round of consultation, which we will talk about later on. I will now hand over to Mr. Woods to present the item. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So the purpose of this report is to update the committee on the progress of the Hartley Gardens Supplementary Planning Document, or SPD, and to seek the committee's endorsement to recommend to Cabinet that the draft SPD be published for public consultation. As the Chairman said, Hartley Gardens is one of the biggest allocations in our adopted local plan, second only to the garden community, and it's on the northwestern edge of Clacton between Brook Park West and St John's Road. It's expected to deliver around 1,700 homes, including affordable housing, plus employment land, a primary school, early years provision, and a range of community and green infrastructure. So it's a major strategic site, and it's significant in terms of meeting our housing targets as we progress through the local plan review. Development in this part of Clacton was proposed over 20 years ago, and the land, some land was allocated in the 2007 local plan for what is now the Ledgerton Drive development near Bockings Elm. But even at that stage, it was suggested that the area could accommodate a much larger strategic development that would extend towards Brook Retail Park. It's now our adopted local plan that formally allocates Hartley Gardens, and policy SAMU2 was consulted on in 2016 and 2017 as part of that local plan process, and it was examined by a planning inspector and found to be found sound in 2021. Once Section 2 of the local plan was adopted in 22, the site, along with other allocations in the plan, became council policy, and so the principle of development in this part of Clacton is now firmly established. But because of the scale of the development proposed here, the policy requires a comprehensive and coherent approach, the detail of which is set out in the SPD and master plan that's presented this evening. As members will be all too well aware, delivering development at this scale presents significant challenges, and fragmented land ownership has been a particular complication in this case in bringing the site forward for development. So in 2021, the council began working with Homes England, who are the government's housing and regeneration agency. Homes England bring a wealth of expertise in delivering strategic housing sites, such as Hartley Gardens, and over the There we go. We're back. Thank you. So Homes England has also provided the council with capacity support to assist with the preparation of the SPD and master plan that's required by the local plan policy. They appointed a multidisciplinary team of consultants who have supported TDC officers with developing the master plan and the SPD through regular collaborative meetings that have taken place between officers in the planning policy team, colleagues from across the wider council, representatives from Essex County Council, and Homes England's team, all under a planning performance agreement. These meetings have covered a wide range of topics covering design principles, land uses, open spaces, education, healthcare, environmental matters, and infrastructure delivery. And the whole process of preparing the SPD has been underpinned by early informative stakeholder engagement. The detail about this engagement is set out in the consultation statement, which is one of the background papers to tonight's report, and so I'll just present a few highlights this evening. But very early in the master planning process, there was a public consultation with 2 in-person events and an online website. There's a photo from one of these events on page 39 of your agenda pack. The events took place in the daytime at Albert Edward Hall on Ledgerton Drive and in the evening at the Town Hall. About 175 people attended, and participants were able to write their comments on display boards, which were collated and then reviewed after the events. The website had a more detailed questionnaire that people could fill in over a 3-month period, and although the website had about 700 visitors over that time, only 29 people formally completed the survey. But all of this feedback, including that was gathered at the events, informed the development of the vision and objectives for the SPD, which have then gone on to shape the master plan and development principles that we're discussing tonight. Key issues were broadly, as we would have expected, so the need for community facilities such as healthcare and schools, concerns around congestion in the local area and the need for adequate parking throughout the site, and the need to prioritise children's play spaces along with space for wildlife. People also highlighted the importance of creating employment and training opportunities and ensuring that a new neighbourhood centre does not compete with Clacton Town Centre, particularly in light of the council's ongoing regeneration projects. People wanted to see active travel network improved, and so more and better facilities for walking and cycling, and house sizes that would be large enough for families. Around the time of this public consultation, affected ward members were also engaged. We held internal briefing sessions run by our own officers for members representing Blue House, Canhall, Bursville, St Osyth, Little Clacton, and West Clacton and Jaywick Sands wards. And these were followed by focus member workshops with the master planning consultants. Particular local issues were highlighted out of this work, such as concerns around congestion on Little Clacton Road and difficulty in accessing GP appointments, as well as reiterating many of the points that came out of the broader public engagement. And key statutory consultees have been engaged throughout the master planning and SPD process with colleagues from bodies such as Natural England, the local NHS Integrated Care Board, or ICB, and Essex County Council, all taking part in focus meetings to ensure that relevant topics and issues were considered and responded to adequately. And as the master plan itself was developed, the Essex Quality Review Panel was commissioned to provide formative feedback on the proposals. The panel are part of the Essex Planning Officers Association, which oversees the Essex Design Guide, and the format of that day consisted of a site visit followed by a roundtable discussion of the plans. The panel took place in October 2023 and was attended by officers from the council, colleagues from Essex County Council, representatives from Homes England and their consultants, and then the panel members themselves. And after a thorough walkthrough of the site, we came back to the committee room for a presentation by the master planners, followed by questions and clarifications from the panel. And then the panel went on to produce a detailed report on the emerging designs, giving constructive feedback on how they could be improved to reflect best practice and identifying areas that needed more work and focus, which was picked up over the following months. And so turning to the SPD itself, which begins on page 35 of your agenda pack, the purpose of the SPD is to set out a comprehensive master plan and planning guidance that will inform future planning applications and infrastructure delivery in relation to Hartley Gardens. It doesn't introduce any new planning policies, it builds on what's already in the local plan, but it does seek to provide clarity and structure for how the site could come forward, ensuring a coordinated approach and aspiring towards a high quality development that sets a high standard for future developments in the district to follow. The requirements and principles set out in the SPD will be material considerations when future planning applications for Hartley Gardens are determined. The SPD is structured around several key sections. There's an introduction, an assessment of the site and its context, vision and objectives, a spatial framework or master plan, development principles, a chapter on infrastructure delivery, and then next steps to delivery. And the whole SPD is supported by a site-specific infrastructure delivery plan and several other documents that form the evidence base for the SPD, including transport work, a cost plan, and an equalities impact assessment. These are all linked as background documents to the report, so they're listed on page 34 of the agenda. So following the introduction to the site and to the document, the second chapter is an assessment of the site and its context. It summarises the extensive site analysis work that's taken place over the last few years, and it's summed up by the combined constraints plan on page 45. You can see flood zones in purple, and particularly on Pickers Ditch, important woodlands at Long Grove, Tea Grove, as well as at Hartley Wood to the west. It identifies tree preservation orders, overhead and underground utilities, the extent of the nearby wind turbines at Earls Hall, footpaths, important habitats. It demonstrates the amount of factors that have been considered and responded to in the emerging master plan. And over the subsequent pages, there's information about local character, landscapes, ecology and heritage, access and movement, flooding and utilities. And then on page 56, this condenses down to an initial set of opportunities for the site, for walking routes, natural spaces, including dark corridors for habitat protection, as well as points of access to the site. And so all of this work, the stakeholder and community engagement and the site analysis, all came together to inform a vision for Hartley Gardens, which is set out on page 58 of your agenda. The ambition for Hartley Gardens is to create a healthy, inclusive and sustainable urban extension that feels like part of Clacton, but also has its own identity. It's about walkable neighbourhoods, high-quality homes, green spaces, protecting the environment, delivering community facilities and infrastructure, and creating a place that the local community can be proud of. We hope that Hartley Gardens will become an example of best practice in the tendering area, a development that will demonstrate best practice in design, placemaking, and the provision of community infrastructure, and one which sets the bar high for future growth in the district through our extended local plan period and beyond. The evolution of a master plan, or the spatial framework for the site, is set out in the next chapter. But if you skip forward to page 65 of your agenda, you'll see the final version. It sets out some broad intentions with regard to land use, access point and main roads, open spaces and a community centre, all of which are built on in the next chapter, Development Principles. It's the plan that subsequent requirements and guidance are based on. And through the next chapter, there are versions of the map which focus on particular areas or issues. So there's one for each of the proposed character areas, one that focuses on movement, one on landscape. But the important thing to emphasise is that these aren't detailed plans that the Council is considering or approving at this stage. And as an SPD, they aren't binding to the same level as the local plan policies map or approved plans as part of a planning application. The SPD and the spatial framework are planning guidance. There'll be material considerations when we determine planning applications, and they set out how the Council expects development to come forward on the site. And they demonstrate how a coherent and comprehensive approach to development required by the local plan policy can be achieved, and all of the policy SAMU2 requirements are reflected here. But you can't take a scale rule to these maps to understand where homes will be, where the open space or the school or employment land will be. The intention is that they'll be used in the preparation of detailed plans for future planning applications. It's important to acknowledge that these proposals are developed how these proposals are developed, and as new evidence becomes available, there may need to be deviation or variation from the spatial framework. And so the SPD sets out the requirements for any such deviation. So they must be supported by robust evidence, must not conflict or prejudice the delivery of the wider site development, including infrastructure. They mustn't undermine the integrated and coordinated approach to the wider development, and they must conform to the policy requirements in the local plan. And so what that means is if a landowner or developer brings forward proposals for something that doesn't directly align with this master plan or spatial framework, there's still a high bar to be met to demonstrate how they comply with the principles of the SPD, if not with the exact land uses set out on the map. And so then turning to chapter 5 on page 67 of your agenda, which is where the real meat of the document, the development principles, reside. The master plan divides the site into 4 character areas, each shaped by its landscape, heritage assets, and relationship with existing communities. The central character area will be the heart of the development, with shops, a school, early years provision, and community facilities. It's designed to be the most active and accessible part of the site, with medium to higher density housing and a strong emphasis on active travel and public space. This is where the real community benefits will be delivered. And it's important to emphasise that the facilities that are proposed here, including open spaces, children's play areas and sports pitches, won't just be for the new residents at Hartley Gardens, but also for the residents of nearby communities like Can Hall. The SPD requires comprehensive and convenient walking and cycling connections from nearby communities into the heart of the new neighbourhood. The northern character area forms the gateway to the site and is influenced by Little Clacton, with low to medium densities and green buffers to maintain separation. The eastern gateway character area is adjacent to the A133 and Brook Retail Park, so it includes proposals for employment development to act as a buffer between residential development and the main road. And there's scope here for a sensitive transition between employment uses and the residential areas, with an emphasis on fostering a cohesive community character. And then finally, the southern character area borders the existing residential area along St John's Road and Constable Avenue. And its purpose is to integrate sensitively with those neighbouring communities, with a focus on connectivity and landscape. The built form section from page 73 covers detailed urban design principles for the site, such as density, building height and orientation, street width, and safety. Variety across the site is going to be important here, but we need to maintain a distinct character in each of those 4 character areas. Movement and access are key themes because they were a particular concern among the public and our own members in the early stages of engagement. And so the SPD sets out a hierarchy of streets and access points and seeks to prioritise active travel and public transport. The aim is for 70% of the homes to be within 400 metres of a bus stop, and there's a strong emphasis on cycle routes, green links, and integrated public spaces. This is a vision-led approach to transport planning that's required by new national planning policy. But we know that locally, use of private cars will continue to be a necessity, and so the SPD also considers car access in detail. The main concern raised through early public engagement is that such a large number of new homes accessed via Little Clapton Road would overwhelm the existing junction at Bockingselm and have a harmful impact on the people that live in that area. So to overcome this, the master plan identifies 4 points of access for the site. One in the north that reconfigures the Bovels roundabout, and then 3 in the south. One on Little Clapton Road, one directly onto Ledgerton Drive, near the public open space there, and one directly onto St John's Road, opposite Jaywick Lane. At this stage in the planning process, the precise layout of these junctions hasn't been determined, but the principle of this access strategy has been agreed with colleagues at Essex County Council Highways, subject to further technical work, looking at the exact configuration of these new junctions, which will come forward through the planning application process. Parking is also picked up in the movement section, and there will be a mix of on-street, on-plot and shared parking provision, along with provision for electric vehicle charging, blue badge spaces and parent-child parking near key facilities, as well as safe, accessible and convenient parking for different kinds of bikes throughout the development. Moving on, there's a strong emphasis on environmental factors, biodiversity net gain, habitat creation, climate resilience, and the creation of a network of multifunctional open spaces. Existing landscape features like trees, hedgerows and habitats will need to be protected and enhanced. And Natural England have been consulted on the proposed SPD requirements early in the process to ensure the proposals meet with their standards with regards to providing suitable open spaces that provide options for dog walking and exercise that don't involve daily travel to the more sensitive areas of our district like the Naze or Holland Haven. And the SPD in total proposes about 40 hectares of open natural spaces. Requirements around play areas for different age groups have been developed in conversation with our own open spaces and public realm teams. And there's an emphasis on a smaller number of larger destination play areas rather than multiple smaller parks that are harder to maintain. These parks should be safe, inclusive, and include activities and facilities that meet the requirements of those with specific needs. Page 86 of your agenda includes a plan illustrating how the neighbourhood centre could be configured. And then 2 pages later, on page 88, there's a greater level of detail. So this neighbourhood centre is where the new primary school, the nursery, key play areas, retail uses, and also the community hub, consisting of flexible space for health facilities, will be located, all focused around a public square. The requirements are ambitious, and they seek to set a high standard regarding environmental and community impacts of the development. The land uses section sets out the principles around this neighbourhood centre, education provision, employment land principles, and then the homes and buildings section goes on to establish the requirement for design codes to accompany planning applications. And finally, the resources and lifespan section looks at energy efficiency, water saving measures and other standards around minimising the impact of the new development on the climate. There's also reference to communication and connectivity requirements like gigabit broadband and 5G mobile coverage, as well as sustainable construction principles. The infrastructure chapter begins on page 94. The SPD is supported by a detailed infrastructure delivery plan, IDP, which is linked as a background document, which sets out what needs to be delivered, at what point of development that need will be triggered, how it will be funded, including estimated costs, and who's responsible for delivering it. So strategic infrastructure like schools, healthcare and highways will be funded through developer contributions and coordinated by a lead developer, whereas site-specific infrastructure like on-plot utilities, sustainable drainage and local pockets of open space will be delivered by individual developers throughout the site. The IDP is designed to be fair and flexible so that no single landowner is disproportionately burdened. And importantly, it can be updated independently of the SPD so that it can reflect evolving needs and evidence. The requirements in the IDP have been established through engagement with key infrastructure providers, and particularly the Education Department at Essex County Council and local NHS partners, who have emphasised the need for flexible, multi-purpose spaces to enable the way they deliver healthcare to adapt over the coming years as their strategies and their plans evolve. Exact details of the phasing of development will come forward as part of the planning application, but the SPD is clear on page 95 that a community focal point should be established as soon as possible, including leisure and commercial opportunities to enable a community to grow and establish itself early on in development. Then the final chapter sets out the next steps to actually delivering the site, and it places a strong emphasis on the developer undertaking pre-application discussions with the council, further use of the design review panel, and ongoing community engagement. But before we get to that stage, we're proposing a 6-week public consultation on this draft SPD, which would run in October and November. Similar to the early stage engagement, officers are proposing 2 public events, one near to the site and one at the town hall. And like with the recent local plan consultations, all the documents will be available online and offline. And offline they'll be available at the town hall and at libraries around Clacton. We'll need to ensure that there's clear communication, that it's the master plan and the guidance in the SPD that are being consulted on at this stage, not the principle of development in this part of Clacton, which we know has already been established through the local plan. And we'll work closely with the council's communication team to maximise public awareness using the council's website, social media, sending letters or emails to those who have registered on our planning policy consultation database, and issuing a press release to local newspapers. And then after the consultation, we'll analyse all of the feedback that we receive, prepare a final version of the SPD, which will be reported back to committee later this year, before hopefully being recommended for final adoption by the Cabinet. After that, we expect to see the first planning applications in the first half of 2026, with delivery possibly starting from 2029. Obviously, that time frame extends beyond local government reorganisation in Essex, or LGR, and so the SPD becomes an even more important tool to ensure that the council's ambitions around the kind of development that Hartley Gardens will be are confirmed now and can be carried forward and applied consistently by a new unitary authority. An adopted SPD will continue to be a material planning consideration, whichever future council is determining a planning application on the site. So this is another major step towards seeing Hartley Gardens actually delivered. The SPD provides a framework for high quality coordinated development, and one that will set the benchmark for future developments in tendering. But just as importantly, it also demonstrates greater certainty about the deliverability of Hartley Gardens. And as we progress with our local plan review and move towards submitting an updated local plan for examination, it will be crucial that we and a planning inspector can be confident that this development site will be delivered and make a significant contribution towards meeting our housing target in the longer term. An adopted SPD and possibly a first planning application determined make the case for continuing to rely on Hartley Gardens for delivering around 1,700 new homes. And so I'll refer you to the recommendation, which is back on page 21 of your agenda. It's recommended that the Planning Policy and Local Plan Committee considers and comments on the Hartley Gardens Draft Supplementary Planning Document, SPD, August 2025, and agrees to recommend to Cabinet that the draft SPD and associated evidence base listed as background documents will be published for consultation with residents and other interested stakeholders. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Paul Wood, and I congratulate you and the team for a very comprehensive finished article which will be for debate this evening. The one comment I have before I go to the speakers will be on as a community governance review going on, and that's been kind of acknowledged on page 98, where the asset transfer will take place to will be given to the district council or any other statutory providers. So you haven't spoken about that, but that's going on in the background, and I'm sure it's on everybody's mind that that's going on. But I don't know if you wanted to say anything on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So stewardship will be a big consideration as the detailed plans for Hartley Gardens emerge. And so there are broad principles sketched out in the SPD, but the detail really will come forward through planning applications. But you're absolutely right, with the local governance review going on, any potential new sort of town councils would be crucial to that process of determining a suitable stewardship model for Hartley Gardens.
Thank you. I will now invite Mr. Martin Rowson to come forward, and you might like to introduce yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes, and Mr. Ford will give you a prompt. There's 30 seconds left.
Good evening, I'm Martin Ropes and I work with Kevin Britton of Clacton-based Britton Developments. Over 25 years he's delivered the Brook Retail Park with Tesco, B&Q and PC World and the Country Park. And then on the edge of the Hartley Gardens allocation, the Lidl, Pets at Home, the Marston's Hotel, and he's brought M&S back to Clacton. He's secured the development of 200 new homes there too. On Hartley Gardens, Britain owns all of what should be seen as critical land alongside the main A133 into Clacton. Long ago he tried to bring all the landowners together, but intentions and desires were highly disparate, and the council allocating the site didn't change that. So a previous administration called in Homes England, a government-funded agency, to hopefully mastermind delivery. One of the first things they did was spend £12 million buying 2 fields on the site. They have a sleeping partner, Greenwich Hospital, whose charitable status prevents it taking the risks that Britain has to. Britain is the only active developer owning land here. But the opportunity presented here will not be able to engage our expertise. Homes England has turned its back on our resources, both land and skills. And you are going to have an outline planning application from Homes England and Greenwich Hospital in the next year. And if you know the Montana roundabout and you know Little Clacton Road, those are going to be the 2 accesses, and the land between them will be the subject of the outline planning application. But we will make extensive representations. There is a lot to say, a lot to be done, so plans deliver urgently needed housing. But there are fundamental difficulties here. The basic off-site infrastructure costs are £82 million. That's an extra £50,000 per house on top of all the normal site-specific infrastructure. These would be the most expensive new homes in Clacton if anyone could afford to buy them. Not surprising, therefore, that a report to Homes England concludes the ability of the whole scheme could be undermined by the higher upfront cost of infrastructure. So an equalisation agreement will try to collect funding from individual landowners so that this essential infrastructure might be delivered. Homes England will of course take its money from the government, but how can we be sure that that source will remain available when they say the first house would not be built until 2029? A large part of our site is surprisingly shown for employment, notwithstanding Homes England's own consultants essentially saying, and I summarise, that this won't come forward without further subsidy. That's more on top of the 82 million. Meanwhile, I conclude that Britain could deliver 300 houses, have people living in them by 2029 with no subsidy, no cross-funding, no equalisation agreement, and help to prevent planning appeals dictating where people's search for a new home should live. He's happy to participate in this, but he thinks there's still quite a lot of work to be done to knock this into shape. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Robeson. If you'd like to go back to the gallery. Thank you. Now, call on Councillor Geeta Sudhir, who's the, one of the ward members there, and your interest has already been noted that you live in Blue House Ward. You have 3 minutes, and he will give you a prompt 30 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak at this meeting. Subject being Hartley Gardens. I am one of the ward councillors in Canhall, along with Councillor Gina Placey. I would like to declare an interest as I reside in Blue House Ward. Hartley Gardens falls in both of these wards. As the agenda states, infrastructure provision is expected to be a key concern for residents and for the future. as local government reorganisation takes shape. When I was first elected 2 years ago, Hartley Gardens was a hot topic of chat with local residents. Many were saying they don't want development to happen as they like the open fields. But this was already in the pipeline and development will gradually happen. The second topic on residents' minds was strategic infrastructure. The roads had to be properly planned. Where will people work? What about schools and health facilities? How about the extra traffic? Little Clacton Road is not safe. Public transport has to improve. Brook Retail Park West is disconnected for those who cannot access by car. And as the road hasn't been completed, buses are not running there. Can Hall is disconnected from Brook Retail Park as there is no through road provision. This brings the thought of access for emergency vehicles. Safety for residents for using the subway to Brook Retail Park must be addressed. It's been flooded during heavy rain on numerous occasions, and maybe CCTV is needed for safety. People moving into Hartley Gardens need security of public transport, especially if they are working out of town. We need connectivity with other villages, towns, and cities. As stated, Hartley Gardens will be a major extension to Clacton-on-Sea with 1,700 homes, and we need good connectivity with our town centre. We want our town to thrive. Healthcare provision is on residents' minds, so we require firm guarantees that this will be available locally in the neighbourhood centre or community hub. Affordable housing should be made available to healthcare staff as priority. They don't feel disadvantaged. They would have to travel long distances to work. But I am grateful to officers for their updates, and I welcome continued communication with them, the ICB, Homes England, and I look forward to the upcoming public consultation. Thank you for listening.
Well timed, Councillor Souter. Thanks so much indeed. If you'd like to go back to that. Mr. Woods, is there any comments you'd like to make before I go to members on both speakers' remarks?
Thank you, Chairman. So happy to pick up a few of those points. Absolutely recognise that infrastructure is a key concern for local residents. That message came through loud and clear through our early engagement with the community, and it's been a key focus through the preparation of the Hartley Gardens SPD. Work on the infrastructure delivery plan has been extensive, and we've been engaging not just with Essex County Council for education, but also with the local NHS Trust, the ICB, to understand what provision is going to be most suitable for Hartley Gardens. And the thing that we've wanted to avoid is putting in a requirement that there is a new GP surgery that then doesn't align with the future strategy for local NHS health provision. And what's been made very clear to us through our engagement is that the NHS need that flexibility to be able to adapt as their delivery of healthcare changes over the coming years. And we're already seeing more people accessing their sort of GP either online or by the phone, but also a lot of services that would traditionally be delivered by a GP now being delivered by pharmacies. And so that whole model of how primary healthcare is delivered is changing. We know that our colleagues at the NHS are developing a strategy for the sort of the coming years to determine how they best deliver that. And so they need the Hartley Gardens requirements to be flexible to respond to that. And so that's what we've sought to do in consultation with colleagues at the NHS. Highways has been another big concern. We know that Little Clacton Road has difficulty with congestion, but also in the northern part of the road, it can be quite dangerous. It's a fast road with narrow bends. And so part of the access strategy for Hartley Gardens involves reconfiguring Bovil's roundabout to the north, so putting a new arm that leads directly from the roundabout into Hartley Gardens, into the main road through the development, and stopping up the existing arm of the roundabout onto St Osyth Road. That would downgrade St Osyth Road in the northern part of Little Clacton Road It would stop it being a cut-through for people that need to access the western part of Clacton from the A133, and instead they'd need to come through Hartley Gardens, which would have traffic calming measures to make sure that it remains safe and walkable, or use the main roads, the main route being the A133 to St John's Roundabout. That would result in slightly increased journey times for some residents on St Osyth Road and that northern part, but we think that it would take sort of an extra a couple of minutes, or 90 seconds is the calculation, to reach Babel's Roundabout through the new route through Hartley Gardens. And so the strategy seeks to address those issues around safety on Little Clacton Road, but as highlighted in my presentation, we're looking at 3 points of access in the southern part of the Hartley Gardens site, so that it doesn't all funnel down into Little Clacton Road, but it will be distributed between 3 different access points, because we need to protect the amenities of residents on that southern part of Little Clacton Road. The detail around phasing, about which accesses are required at which stage, will come forward as part of the planning application, and that will need to be in accordance with the requirements of the Highways Authority, be that Essex County Council at the time or a new unitary authority in the future. Future highways modelling work and that detailed phasing strategy for access provision will need to be to the satisfaction of the Highways Authority. Connection to the town centre is also really important for Hartley Gardens, and that's been a key focus of the initial site analysis work, looking at the opportunities and constraints, connecting into existing footpaths that connect down southwise through neighbouring communities, and also looking at what off-site improvements might be required for cycling infrastructure to be able to access the town centre from Hartley Gardens by sustainable modes. And of course, public transport is really important. I highlighted earlier that the ambition is that 70% of homes will be within 400 metres of a bus stop. So not only will there be public transport coming through the site, but it should be convenient. It should be an easier first choice for residents, which in time hopefully will also ease congestion if fewer people have to rely on their cars. There's no proposal at all that people wouldn't be able to park near their homes or to be able to drive where they need to, but to make those alternatives more attractive choices has underpinned the access and movement strategy for Hartley Gardens. Affordable housing will need to, at the very least, meet the local plan requirement for 30%. There's no policy requirement for who those affordable homes should be for, and that's not a policy requirement that we can introduce through a supplementary planning document. But it is an interesting consideration in areas where there is potentially a shortage of healthcare workers or other key workers, something that we might be able to pick up through the local plan review if that becomes something the evidence can support. I think that was the key points from Councillor Sudra, and so I'm going to come back to my notes from Mr. Robeson. And yeah, I acknowledge and appreciate the involvement that his client, Mr. Britton, has had in this site for very many years. And as I sort of said in my report, 20 years ago or more, the site was first proposed for development, and it came forward in a very sort of measured manner initially through the 2007 plan. But there's been a lot of work ongoing in those intervening years to try to bring this site forward. But the fragmented land ownership has made that really challenging. And yeah, Mr. Britton has experienced that firsthand. The involvement of Homes England has really unlocked the delivery of the wider site. They've been able to, as Mr. Robeson said, buy out some of the landowners so that between them and the Greenwich Hospital Trust, with whom they have a collaboration agreement, they now own the majority of the site. There are smaller parcels of land that are owned by different individual landowners, and all of those landowners were invited at the very start of the process to meet with Homes England to discuss their aspirations for their land and to work with them to develop this master plan and the development framework that we're set out this evening. Some landowners chose to engage quite actively with that process. Others were were a bit more reluctant or less actively engaged, but the opportunity has been there to feed into this master planning process, to have a seat at the table. The land that Mr. Robeson spoke about on the eastern edge of the site, it is a really important piece of land. It abuts the A133, which is part of the Strategic Highways Network. It connects in to Brook Park West, which is a key employment and retail provision in this part of Clacton. And there are opportunities highlighted through the SPD and the master plan to connect Brook Park West into the greater Hartley Gardens area. So that could be by means of highway connections, sort of through north into whatever development comes next at Brook Park West and then into the site, but also footpaths and cycleways to connect directly west into the neighbourhood centre. And the homes that have been delivered already there will be able to connect into and benefit from those neighbourhood facilities as well. The use of that land on the eastern part of the site has been subject of much discussion because we know in the policy, in the local plan, there's a requirement for up to 7 hectares of employment land. And so it's not prescriptive, there's not a lower threshold. And we know through ongoing work on the local plan review that in quantitative terms, the quantity of employment land, there isn't a pressing need to allocate more land in tendering for additional employment land. But when it comes to the quality, so the type and the location of employment land, there is a need, because there are businesses who either are already in the district that want to expand, or others that want to invest in the district that can't find employment land that suits their needs. And so having land that is really close to the strategic road network, it's in the right locations, but also is the right kind of employment development, so be that sort of for light industrial or office use, there is a need for different kinds of employment use in the district and in Clacton as well. So the study that Mr. Robeson referred to has been a piece of evidence that Homes England have commissioned through the master planning work to understand what level of specificity should be included in the SPD and the master plan. And the conclusions of that work were unconclusive. So there isn't a pressing demand for a particular type of land use at Hartley Gardens. And for that reason, we haven't been prescripted and said there's got to be 6.5 or 7 hectares of this kind of use, but identified an area of land where we think that would be most suitably located. In this case, close to the main road with good access onto the A133, but also in a place where it provides some buffer between that very busy main road, and we can see on that constraints plan, the very sort of colourful map towards the beginning of the presentation, where there is noise spilling over from that road. And so having employment land there presents an opportunity to provide a buffer and then a transition into the residential areas. But the SPD, it's not policy, and so it's not prescriptive. There are ways in which an applicant for any parcel of land could present evidence and present a case that the land uses identified on that master plan aren't most appropriate, or there isn't a market demand, and therefore a different land use, potentially housing, could come forward. But the crucial thing is that if housing comes forward in a part of the site that isn't identified for housing at the moment, it does need to demonstrate how it complies with that comprehensive, joined-up, coherent approach to development. So it's not just an individual pocket of development that is disconnected from the rest of Hartley Gardens, that doesn't contribute to the overall infrastructure requirements for the site. I do acknowledge that the infrastructure requirements for a site of this size are large. We see that through the garden community at the Colchester border as well, that to deliver development at this scale and all the infrastructure that's required, including highways connections and community facilities that are needed to serve 1,700 new homes, they do come with a cost. And so the approach is to distribute that cost between all developers. And there could well be opportunity for additional government funding to forward fund some of that infrastructure. We've seen that through the HIF funding for the garden community. But we don't know at this stage what funding opportunities will be available, because government policy changes, and so we can't make plans now based on what we imagine might be government policy in 2 or 3 years' time. And so we will need to wait and see what infrastructure requirements need that additional funding or that subsidy from government, and then see what sources of funding are available at that time. Mr. Robeson indicated that Mr. Britton's land could develop 300 homes immediately, and that may be the case. We've been having conversations with some different landowners about proposals that could come forward in the short to medium term. But without seeing detailed proposals, it's hard to say whether they would comply with the requirements that we're proposing in this SPD, but most importantly, whether they will integrate effectively with Hartley Gardens as a whole, particularly looking at the neighbourhood character areas that we're looking to establish in different parts of the site, so that you don't have one homogenous block of housing, but different parts of Hartley Gardens have a different feel, a different level of density, different open spaces and facilities. And so when a application comes forward for any parcel of land on the site, be that Mr. Britton's or otherwise, we would expect it to demonstrate how it complies with any planning guidance that's in place at the time. And so once the SPD is adopted following public consultation and consideration by the committee and by Cabinet, it would become planning guidance. It would be a material consideration in any planning application that comes forward, be that submitted by Homes England or by a different landowner. I think, Chairman, that I've picked up all of the points raised in the two speakers, but if there's any other questions from members or clarifications, happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Woods. Very comprehensive. I don't think there was anything left out there, so well done. I'll go to members now. Anyone wish to make any comment, any questions? Councillor White.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I was very lucky in that I saw and heard Paul Wood's most excellent presentation about a fortnight ago, as coming from one of the parishes that borders immediately on the side of this development. I was very impressed with it then. I'm very impressed with it now. But one of the things that worry me is this timing or phasing, because members will know that we've got a 900 property development just immediately south, known as Ramsay's Farm or Jaywick Lane. And in the permissions for that, Essex County Council have specified what will happen at the junction of Jaywick Lane. Now, my understanding from what Paul has told us, the road onto the site from Jaywick Lane would probably be the last bit of that road. In other words, we would tend to start development from the top end. And if that is the case, the road, as it gets pushed through, it's going to be some time before it gets to Jaywick Lane. So my question is, have I got that little bit right? In the proposals too, there is another primary school. Well, of course, we've already got a primary school planned in the Jaywick Lane development. And so again, timing comes into it. The Can Hall provides primary schools at the present moment, and that is greatly overloaded without the new properties suggested in Hartley Gardens. So again, I go back to timing. So how are we going to propose to develop the road through, and which stage will we start the development?
Thank you, Councillor White. Mr. Woods.
Thank you, Councillor White. Very important considerations at this stage of the planning process, how we ensure that phasing delivers the right infrastructure at the right times. One of the things that members will be familiar with, having seen large-scale planning proposals moving through the system, is that we can't predict exactly how quickly sites can come forward. We make an estimate about the trajectory of delivery on certain sites, but what we can't control is firstly external factors that might slow down the preparation of a planning application or the determination of a planning application, but also market factors that determine how quickly homes are delivered. And so at this stage, there's simply not enough certainty to be able to say at year 7, this amount of road will be required, at year 6, this primary school will be required. But what we can say is that the requirements set out in the SPD are for a comprehensive phasing plan to come forward as part of planning applications. And so once an outline planning application comes forward, there'll be a level of detail, a greater level of certainty than we have now. And phasing plans would need to accompany that to illustrate how different phases of that development will be supported by the right infrastructure. And then as detailed planning applications come forward, there'll be even greater levels of certainty about how the homes will be laid out, what numbers will be in certain parcels of land, and therefore what the requirements will be for different types of infrastructure. And so, although the level of detail now doesn't give a definitive answer, the framework is here that that detail will be made available. before the relevant planning applications will be determined. With regards to the junction at Jaywick Lane, you're correct. There's proposed upgrades to facilitate the Rouse's Farm development, and they're required for the Rouse's Farm development to come forward. And so those improvements need to be made. Otherwise, Rouse's Farm could see setbacks and delays. Hartley Gardens, on the other hand, might not need an access at that point onto St John's Road until much later in the delivery. And for 1,700 homes, it could be 15 or 20 years of build-out time to reach those numbers. It's going to be a long time that this site is being developed. We can't wait until that bit of Hartley Gardens is ready before we make any upgrades at Jaywick Lane. But it could well be that subsequent upgrades will be required by the Hartley Gardens developers when that junction is required. And those detailed works around that junction will be worked out through the planning application process in consultation with the Highways Authority. With regards to the new primary school, again, Rouse's Farm has got that need for a new primary school for the 900 new homes that are being proposed there. We know that local primary schools already have capacity issues as well. And so 1,700 new homes at Hartley Gardens triggers the need for a second new primary school. The ballpark figure is that you'll need around 1,400 homes to trigger a new two-form of entry primary school, which is what is being proposed at Hartley Gardens. And so Hartley Gardens stands on its own in that sense, that it needs a primary school to meet the needs of its future residents. The school place plan that Essex County Council prepare looks 5 years into the future, because that is based on birth rates, and we can't predict how many children might be born in 5 years' time to understand who will be starting primary school in 10 years' time. And so, again, at the stage that planning applications are determined, colleagues at the Education Authority will need to provide up-to-date information about how many spaces there may or may not be at local primary schools, be it Can Hall or be that at the new Rouse's Farm site. And then how many homes at Hartley Gardens can be built before the need for the new primary school to be up and running. So it's not anticipated that the primary school would be the first thing to be built at Hartley Gardens and then wouldn't have any children for the first 5 years of development. But there will need to be really close working with our colleagues at the Education Authority to ensure that what is approved by the council at the planning application stage is sufficient.
Did you want to come back, Councillor White?
It is very reliant on things which are out of our hands. I mean, Rouse's Farm has been on the stock for I don't know how many years, and it could well be that this Hartley Gardens will be starting even before they start on Rouse's Farm. So there's so many unknowns at the present moment, I think. Principle, agree with, I think it's absolutely marvellous, and yeah, let's do it. And I'd be more than happy to propose the recommendation, but it is timing that worries me.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Stevenson.
So if we're playing trumps, this is the third time I've seen it. So I've seen it once as cabinet, once at the same meeting you were at, John, and now tonight. So, and it's good to know that it's a great presentation. I've seen it 3 times now, and I'm still not bored. So thank you for that. My conversation around this, and it is because I'm in massive support for it, is still around the road, and it's the not linking up bit that bothers me. So you've just talked about the schools. Now we've got 2 sites that both say, oh, we need schools, with neither site actually saying we're going to deliver one. So we could end up with a situation where half a site's delivered there and half a site's delivered there. We need a primary school, but neither of them have committed to it because they haven't reached that threshold. Then the second thing that worried me about it is if wherever that location is, if we're not planning to join Jaywick Lane up until the end, that means everybody has to do a circular route all the way around to get to there. And if you start Jaywick end, that means our employment site, which is at the other end, we have that problem with the communicating. And then our proposal is to build the centre first. So it kind of says we need the middle and that end and the centre, which kind of says we kind of need the whole road right at the beginning. And that kind of needs to feed back into this sort of conversation that we have. I'm in support of it. That's not a problem, but I just feel that we haven't got the connected up thinking. You can't sit there and say this is a planning site on its own with no implications elsewhere and then be reliant on another planning application to be doing the primary school provision.
Mr. Woods, need a crystal ball there, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. I think the key point to emphasise around education provision is that it will be based on evidence provided by the Education Authority at the time the application is submitted and determined. And so at the point that Hartley Gardens gets its planning consent, hopefully we'll have a clearer indication of delivery at the Rouse's farm site. But with Hartley Gardens in particular, and the way this master planning has evolved, a lot of the community facilities, particularly the school and a lot of the open space, the sports provision, it's intentionally on land that is controlled by the public sector. So in this case, Homes England, and so there is an ownership map that's in one of the background papers, I think, and it indicates that the Greenwich Hospital Trust and the Homes England land is largely a bulk in the centre of the site. And so that gives a greater level of certainty about the delivery of some of this social infrastructure. Because, as you say, we haven't got a crystal ball. We don't know when the Rouse's farm site is necessarily going to deliver that primary school. Whereas at Hartley Gardens, we have got a little bit more certainty. The public sector is going to be controlling the delivery of the site. And so when there is a need for the primary school, taking consideration of external factors like other planning applications or development sites and existing nearby primary schools, then there's greater certainty or a greater level of confidence for us that that infrastructure can be delivered. Thinking about the road and the need for it to connect in different points at different points in time, particularly if we're looking to develop that community centre, that community neighbourhood early in the development. The key thing to note on the southern part of the site is there are 3 access points that will all connect onto that mains or spine road that will come through the site. And so even if that far southwestern corner near Jaywick Lane doesn't come forward until a later phase, the road that goes through the heart of the site, connecting to Boval's roundabout at the top, will then still have 2 other points of connection in the meantime. And so the key factor will be the capacity of Little Clacton Road and Ledgerton Drive to ensure they're not overwhelmed by the new development. And that will all factor into the phasing approach that is taken here. So it's certainly not a case that people would have to loop all the way around to get to different parts of the site. That will be something that will need to be really clear, that the site will need to be accessible to the people that live there and also to the people that live nearby that want to use the community facilities. But with a site of this size, I think it's unlikely that we would end up in a situation where there is just one outlet being delivered at any one time. I think as the site becomes established, you may well see sort of a parcel in the north and a parcel in the centre, maybe a parcel in the west, all being delivered and selling homes concurrently. So it won't just be a linear fashion that will start at the top and you can look at Google Earth and see it get bigger and bigger to the south as the years go on. But actually there'll be pockets of development happening in different spaces, because that is how you can deliver the infrastructure effectively, but also sort of maximise the marketability of the site.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Stevens?
No, just say it was a good answer. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. Yes, very good report. I agree with my colleagues, Councillor White and Councillor Stevenson, on their comments. The concerns I have is we're talking about primary schools, but you have to also think about preschools before primary schools, and then you'd have to think about when they turn 11, they're big secondary schools. I know that all the secondary schools are full now, and with 1,700 homes plus the 900 homes that Councillor White mentioned, that's 2,600 homes. You think about possibly two kids per household, that's quite a lot of kids. So I know you've got to have primary schools, but preschools need to have a factor in that, and then leaving primary school, secondary school. In terms of this road, the B1027 that goes up to Jaywick Lane, you've got to have the provision of people going along from the southern part of the district that use Jaywick Lane to go to the recycling centre there, plus people going into the town, and then you've got all that development on. So I would like to see perhaps an improvements to the B1027 coming in from St Osoph into the edge of Clacton, I mean, apparently there's about 20,000 vehicular movements on the B1027, and it's growing on average about 10% every year. And that's a lot of vehicle movements. And time the developments coming forward from Hartley Gardens and the ones that Councillor White has mentioned, that's a lot of vehicular movements on that road. And going into the summer season, sometimes you can queue up that road, St John's Road, also the B1027. So there's a lot of things that need to be thought about. But those two factors, the road and the preschools and secondary schools. Thank you.
Mr Woods.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I'd skimmed past it in my presentation, but within the local plan policy itself and within the SPD, preschool or nursery places are highlighted and very important. So the primary school, the policy requirement is that there's 2.1 hectares of land for a new two-form entry primary school with a co-located 56-place early years and childcare facility. And in addition, there also needs to be 0.13 hectares of land for a second 56-place standalone early years and childcare nursery. So that is part of the policy requirement in the local plan, and that's reflected through the SPD as well. And there's reference in the master planning maps to a nursery in addition to the primary school. So really important considerations for this site. Secondary school is more challenging, and it's a conversation we've been having with the Education Authority quite intensely over the last few months with regards to the local plan review, establishing how many homes is the trigger point to deliver a brand new secondary school. And it's far greater than the number of homes we are planning in Clacton. And so to deliver a new secondary school isn't something that the Department for Education would look to do in this situation. However, there is still the requirement in the local plan policy, specifically for Hartley Gardens, that there would need to be financial contributions towards secondary school provision, as required by the local education authority based on evidence need. So the policy requirement is there to ensure that the appropriate contributions based on the evidence from the Education Authority are also made, albeit not directly building a new secondary school on the site. With regards to the road leading from St Osyth towards St John's Road and Jaywick Lane, that is a road that sees congestion, and we see that through the transport modelling work that was done to support the master plan. And the report from the Highways Consultants is one of the background documents here as well, although it's just a summary of the findings. But one of the key considerations when the new junction opposite Jaywick Lane leading into Hartley Gardens, one that may come a bit later in the phasing, and one of the key considerations there will be how you maintain traffic flow effectively, particularly for public transport, because we know that there is a bus stop very close to that junction already. So that's been a key conversation that we've been having as we've looked at potential configurations of that junction. But it's really important that we don't make the situation worse by putting another point of conflict on St John's Road there. The configuration, the way it interacts with nearby junctions, so you've got Jaywick Lane, but then you've also got sort of, other roads leading into Clacton and Ledgerton Drive and Little Clacton Road, how they all interact with each other to ensure you don't get gridlock between those junctions is going to be really important. And so those conversations have been happening between the Highways Consultants that Homes England have been using, and also with colleagues at Essex County Council to look at the options there, possibly connecting up traffic lights at different junctions so that they interact effectively to keep traffic flowing. There's not been any indication that specific upgrades to that piece of road from St Osyth towards Clacton will be required to mitigate the impacts of this particular development. But that's not to say that more generally upgrades may be needed there in the future, and it's something that can be kept under review.
Councillor Scott, do you want to come back?
Chairman, I think Mr Woods has answered some really good brought some good comments there, and I'm thanking him for his answers.
Councillor Fairley.
Thank you, Chairman. And yeah, thank you, Paul, for your really, really comprehensive report. I think the framework as a whole, it's a brilliant document to read through. I haven't had the opportunity, as perhaps others have, to have a presentation on it yet, but I look forward to that happening perhaps further down the line when some more detail, etc., comes through. It's good to hear that the public consultation is going to take place sort of, you said October, November. and that we will get a bit more information, I guess, feedback from residents as to what they think is positive and what they think is negative. It'll be interesting to see how that comes back. Looking at the framework, of course, there's a whole lot more detail that needs to come forward, but it is the nature of the beast that it all channels down as that process happens and you get closer to the planning applications and such like. When you're looking at the site as it is at the moment, you're talking about Pickers Ditch, and within your report you're saying that that ditch, or that waterway, isn't particularly well maintained at the moment. And Councillor Sudra was talking about flooding issues equally as it stands at the moment, sort of, that need to be sorted out. What are the conversations happening around that now, prior to anything coming forwards, that ensures that everything is ready, whether it be in relation to water runoff, whether it be to do with, you know, riparian obligations? So how will that process work? What conversations are happening now, and how does that feed into what may come forward?
Mr. Woods.
There we go.
Try now.
Thank you.
It's gone up, yeah.
It's not my night with
Do
the
you want him
mic.
to answer your question, really?
It's not my night with the microphone this evening, is it? So Essex County Council, as the local flood authority, have been engaging with this work over the past couple of years. So they've been looking at the emerging master planning work, they've been looking at the evidence that's been produced around flooding, and they've given some really constructive feedback on the evidence that's been provided to date, and highlighted areas where more evidence is going to be required, particularly to support a planning application. And so those conversations are already happening early, possibly really sort of in advance of what you might call pre-application discussions that would usually take place before development. So we've got the expertise and sort of the local flood authority. They're very familiar with the site and the proposals that are coming forward. There are sort of some indicative proposals around flood management in the SPD, particularly around Pickers Ditch, as you identified, and the proposal that there would be open space either side there so that homes wouldn't be at risk in the flood zone. And so the idea is to create Pickers Park, which is going to be an open space that's accessible for recreation and sort of will be a more sort of natural open space. And there's been a conversation with the Environment Agency, because in order to have the road that Councillor Stevenson was talking about coming from Babel's Roundabout down to the south of the site, it will need to cross Pickers Ditch, and so we need to understand what the requirements are going to be there. And so there's an agreement in principle with the Environment Agency to have one formal sort of highways crossing of Pickers Ditch, and so they have sort of established what the technical requirements will be in order to have the road crossing Pickers Ditch and not interrupt that waterway, because it plays a really important part in flood management in that part of the town. But we are aware of flooding issues downstream from Hartley Gardens as well, and so there's ongoing work there around what the impact of these new homes will be, how that's managed effectively through sustainable drainage systems and plans. There's not any more detail at the moment about the sort of the longest term stewardship and the sort of the obligations around managing those waterways, but those conversations are ongoing between Homes England's consultants and between our colleagues at the local flood authority.
Did you want to come back?
Thank you. Yeah, just to say it's difficult, isn't it? Because we're always in somebody else's hands, and then if there's a problem, actually that problem is an ongoing problem. It's not put right before we are sort of adding to it with the next problem, which equally isn't tendering's, it's not the planning authority's responsibility, it's somebody else's responsibility. And I just think for residents, there needs to be some sort of reassurance that you know, issues will be solved, especially when you've got subways and things that are flooding and water runoff and such like. But yeah, thank you very much for your response.
It will be soon when we when the unitary thing comes in, if it happens. But there you go. Councillor Bush.
Thank you, Chairman. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Mr. Woods for a really detailed presentation tonight. And actually, I've learned a lot reading through his document. Sad as I am, I've actually read through all of this. I was very naive to the Hartley Gardens. I never realised how historic it is. You know, it's 20 years old, and there we are now, and the actual development and its future is potentially another 20 years. You know, so we're talking about massive, massive ideas and concepts that may materialise and may not materialise. I understand that the numbers in there, and looking at the plan, the SPD was so helpful for me to really understand the geography. Having like travel around their peripheral, going to playing golf 3 times a week at this vast area. Now I know where it is. I never knew before, so that's very useful. So I look at that, but the detail of some of the comments made by my fellow councillors tonight that live the area, know the area far better than I do, and I looked at the plan and the vision and the objectives of where we want to take it through, and what's going to, for me, is wonderful. But for me, it's a bit like Martin Luther King. I have a dream. I've had this dream. I've still got this dream. And when I spoke earlier regarding Homes England and their acquisition of the land and parcels of it and big acquisitions, I get a bit nervous about where we are with government investment going forward now, massively. So what I see, we've running aspirations, we're putting sort of pressures on the residents because some of them are very worried where perhaps some of these action points or these sort of like active points of access are going to be. How will this development go in terms of one package? When I read through the document, it says to me, we want it all under one. We want it all under one package because that's the best. It's a bit like a mini garden communities of Colchester tendering. So we want it under package. When we look at infrastructure and we look at all of that investment in Section 106 and all of that, we know how complex that is. With the road that's going to go around the peripheral and all of that, where's that funding coming from? Homes England, we know where they are now with the HIF funding on Colchester Garden borders. It's so short, they ain't going to make the road. It's going to look for the developer to make the road. And now we've got a master developer. What we've got here, we haven't got no developers. Other than Homes England can be potentially the developer. But what we're seeing is where's that funding coming from? And so when you want to piecemeal infrastructure, we can talk about details at schools, and that will all come out as the whole project. This is like another 20-odd year project going forward if it materialises. So we're talking about things in detail here. Well, we ain't even got off the ground. We can't even secure deals with other parts of farmland. I've listened to a speaker tonight regarding the retail aspects. And I mean, and it's put a commercial edge onto this. I mean, for me, I'm looking at this tonight, the recommendations, I can't disagree. I'll support B to recommend to go to Cabinet and consultation because to get the public to have their say. A confuses me a little bit, considers and comments. What recommendation of that? Because we're commenting it. So, I mean, what we're going to do with the comments tonight? How are you going to take those comments forward in terms of going to consultation to the public? And for me, I just skipped, I've read through all the detail, but what I skipped through is the 2 points. Item 6, item 7, infrastructure delivery, and item 7 is like next steps to delivery. And to me, when I read through that said let's be planning applications are coming in early 26, from who? What? On the basis of once we've got them applications in, when is delivery going to start? When's the infrastructure going to start? Where's the investment going to start? We've sort of got a volatile government at the moment. We don't even know if we're going to get investment to do this. So the pressure that's on potentially residents thinking like, what's going to happen in my neighbourhood? Because all these access roads, this may never happen. And I understand, is this another tick box exercise that absolutely matches out a plan? And I don't disagree with that. It's in the numbers. So with that situation, but when we talk about packaging it up, and we are open to listening to other applicants, that to me sends out a worry because like of other applicants and what they want to do, we've listened to say to the guy at chat tonight, and I'm just thinking there's nothing, this document is excellent and I really commend all the things that's gone into it, but I put a realistic commercial aspect on it, and we're sitting here tonight nodding through something that really, okay, because there is so much detail that's gone into it, and no one can argue about that part of Clacton. It actually to expand it and to actually create this community, another community. I'm totally behind it, but the reality of delivering it, I mean, I'm sorry, but you've really got to convince me, because what's happening right now in this sort of like this government and where we are, where that money's going to be coming from to help that with social housing, I'm struggling. I don't want to put a damper on it, but I'm just trying to put a reality on it. If I was looking at it from a commercial aspect, from the business outside looking at it, thinking this is a great scheme, where's the money coming from? To put the roads in, to put the infrastructure in. You know, we talk about like putting cables back underground, putting substations in. All those things need to make it work. Drainage, flood stuff. All of this needs to be done. I mean, the schools all become a part of it. And how do you equalise? If you break up the packages, if you break up packages into sort of multiple stuff, we're defeating the object. How do we get stewardship out of that? And in fact, how do you equalise? Someone said, I want to build 300, and but you've got to provide all the gas mains, or you'll provide all the electricity mains and water mains across. And they're going to say, well, that don't make my scheme work financially. And they say, well, we'll take that amount of money from you, from the section 106, and we park it up. But that might not get developed, that next section. I mean, this is about reality. And all I want to say is put that on the table tonight. So go out to consultation. Love to hear what the residents say. But part A, I can't sort of get that as a recommendation because we're all making comments and I don't think what that adds any value to this. But so I'll be looking forward to what's coming back. I'm sorry if I sound very sort of like cynical, but I'm just saying I'd like to see it develop. I'd like to see all this new housing, social housing for the people of this district. But I'll tell you what, we've got to get it on the table. We already see Colchester Borders now, and they're struggling with the HIF funding on the road. We're seeing how that's going to be delivered. So let's get the reality. So we're all sitting here ticking boxes and saying, great, this is all what we want for a future, and future investment like employment land, all of that, great. But I just want to put some sort of sterile water onto the table. Thank you very much. Sorry for that.
Before I go to Paul, I just feel compelled to say that Councillor Stevens and I attended the LGA conference, and on the very last day, the guest speaker, who is no longer in government, still an MP, gave us, Mrs. Andrew Rayner, gave us a blinded speech. Officers cannot talk about this, but as politicians we can, on how any large housing development will be supported by the infrastructure. So we have got two major projects. As you said, you sat with us. I don't know whether we should be declaring the fact that we got three members here on the Colchester Board, Colchester Board of Government Community. No, that the roads was the debate that's been going on forever. And we got an assurance, not just Councillor Stevens and I, and the 2,000 people with us were absolutely categorically told that any large housing development will have the infrastructure to go with it. So, well, it's now time for the government to put their money where their mouth is. But I'll pass on to Paul because he couldn't possibly comment on government policies. Mr. Ford, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Yes, Chairman. I just wanted to say to members in response to one of the issues that Councillor Bush raised, that when members come to consider the recommendations, I would suggest that they just solely concentrate on paragraph B, because effectively paragraph A is a recommendation to how members should consider and comment on this actual report in the meeting, which is exactly what you have been doing. And so effectively you've dealt with A because you have considered and you have commented on the SPD. So therefore I would say to members that when you come to considering what your actual decision will be this evening, just to concentrate on paragraph B of the recommendations on page 21.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Woods, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Bush. Really, really helpful comments. I appreciate your apology at the end, but there was no need because they're really valid concerns and they're issues that we as officers have been grappling with over the past few years. And what the SPD and the accompanying infrastructure delivery plan, the IDP, acknowledges is that the best way, or the most effective way to bring forward this site, along with all the associated infrastructure, is to have one developer over the entire site, bringing forward one planning application. But what we know, because of the history of this site, is that that is unlikely to be the case. And we've got landowners who would prefer not to work with Homes England, or would rather bring their parcels of land forward independently. And that's not something that we can control as a council. The garden community, you've got the advantage there that there's sort of a single developer that's got control over a large parcel of the land. At Hartley Gardens, we do have Homes England who have got control over, I would say, the majority of the site, but not all. And so what we've had to do over the past few years is look at how we can ensure that any application that comes forward on the site, be it through Homes England as the largest controller of a piece of land, or from individual landowners like Mr. Britton, who's represented this evening, to make sure that there is a framework to ensure that they can all comply with the policy in the local plan, SAMU2. And I've said this a couple of times, but the SPD doesn't introduce any new policy requirements. It just adds flesh, it adds detail to what's already set out in SAMU2. And so the infrastructure that needs to be delivered is required by local plan policy that was found sound, was considered through the local plan's viability testing work at the time, to be the required infrastructure for the site, to be viable infrastructure for the site. And now we know the market changes, and that we sometimes have to consider viability assessments through the planning process, and that may or may not be the case in future. But I think the fact that we have got Homes England, who are the government body responsible for housing delivery, controlling the major part of this land, can give us a degree of certainty that the site will come forward. And looking at the garden community, the funding from government for the Link Road, for example, that is secured through Homes England. Homes England are already involved in this site, are already familiar with the infrastructure requirements and some of the viability concerns there. And so it's a very difficult site to deliver and to bring forward, but the intention of the SPD and the framework is to put a framework in place to give it the best chance of success through providing clarity and detail around how the infrastructure could be delivered, how it could be equalised between the different sites. And that separation in the IDP between the strategic infrastructure, so some of that big ticket stuff like the school and the highways, and things like undergrounding the overhead electricity wires. All of that is strategic infrastructure that all the different landowners will need to contribute to in a proportionate way. And then there's the site-specific infrastructure, where you've got the little open spaces and the on-plot utilities and things. And so it's our view that this is the most robust framework we can put in place through an SPD to give the site the best possible chance of success, of securing the infrastructure that's required, of equalising between all those different players to make sure that what comes forward delivers what our community and what our residents need. This isn't the end of the story, and it's not a sort of adopt the SPD and it's done. There's going to be more negotiation and more back and forth through the planning application stages that will need to be resolved. But this provides a framework, a pattern that we can follow as we're considering those planning applications, and also gives guidance and details for the developers, individual landowners, as they prepare their applications. It gives them more certainty of what the council would be looking for. You asked a question about next steps to delivery and a planning application being submitted. So Homes England have indicated that they intend to submit a planning application for the land they control. So that's the land they own, the land owned by Greenwich Hospital. But I understand some other landowners have also entered into agreement with Homes England. And so there'll be an outline planning application submitted next year by Homes England in relation to the land that they control and that they can then bring forward for delivery. The delivery model isn't established yet, whether there will be one master developer or whether there will be several developers that pick up different parcels of the site. But the key message that I've had from colleagues at Homes England is that they aren't just involved for the policy preparation stage, for the SPD stage. Their intention is to remain involved with the site to ensure that it actually is delivered, because that's their remit, to deliver new homes. And so we've got some certainty based on government policy and government priorities at the moment, where there's a real emphasis on delivering new homes, that Homes England will continue to work with the council, continue to support us to make sure that the site does come forward in a timely manner. As to future changes in national policy, that's not something that we can predict, But this SPD does set us in good stead, that we understand what the requirements are for the site. And if in 5 years' time we need to look at different funding routes for some of the infrastructure, we've got the framework in place already. And whichever council or unitary authority is determining those applications, and whether Homes England or another government body is involved in helping deliver the site, we've got this framework in place now. So that's the purpose behind it, really, is to try to grapple with those really challenging issues of this site.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Do you want to come back, Mr. Wood?
Yeah, Mr. Woods, thank you very much for frank and honest response to my questions. I think, you recognise the complexity and what we're facing for. And it's still in this void of uncertainty of how we can go forward with that in terms of these timescales. It's just watch this space. I mean, I'd be very keen to see what Home England's application looks like come early New Year, and how they're going to take it forward in what sort of package going forward. And the delivery for 2029, who knows, with sort of the future elections in 2029, if not before. So thank you ever so much for your time tonight, because it's been very, very informative and helpful to me. Thank you.
A year is a long time in politics, isn't it? Let alone 2. Let alone 3. Okay, I've got no further speakers. So before I go to Councillor Baker, as a custom to go to planning portfolio holder, I think that what's been raised, it's really the same concerns as our residents have told us, which is no surprise. And for the first time, there's really very little that we can add to a document which has got just about everything in it. I think it's been said that the luxury that we have with the garden communities, we have just one developer, and that will, when an application is submitted, there'll be a myriad of support information on stewardship, on health strategies and all the rest of the stuff, infrastructure. But sadly with this, and I think your last response to Councillor Bush made it quite clear what the commitments from Home England are going to be. And if they listen to Councillor Stevenson, who can build the road out first, that would be really a big win for everyone. So I'll go to you, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Fairley.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to make the recommendations on page 21 as written. I'll second it then, thank you.
Okay, members, that's no further speakers. Councillor White, I was just about to go to what Mr. Ford said, but
I have the chance of recommending it. It will be exactly as Mr. Ford has suggested. We are already discussing A, so the recommendation would be to agree to recommend this whole document to the Cabinet so that the draft SPD and associated evidence base be published for consultation. That will be my proposal.
Councillor Fairley, you're right with that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
And I think our committee, are we happy to delete A because we've already, as Mr. Ford suggested, Councillor Ford, 2027 is coming quickly. Okay, so it's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous. I won't even come to you, Mr. Ford. Members, thank you very much indeed. And once again, Mr. Woods, thank you very much for having presented such a sterling piece of work. And there's no other item to debate. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much indeed.